Welcome to Restoring Education in America with Priscilla Rahn. She's a master educator and author, leading the conversation to restore the American mind through wisdom, virtue, and truth.
Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to Restoring Education in America. I'm your host, Priscilla Rahn, and I am so thrilled that you have tuned into the show today. I just wanted to quickly remind you that it's America's 250th birthday this year, and I am so excited. I am part of opening a new private classical school in the Centennial, Colorado area this fall. It's called Excalibur Classical Academy, and our mission and vision is restoring America's heritage by developing servant leaders who are keepers and defenders of the principles of freedom for which our founding fathers pledged their lives, fortunes, and sacred honor. So if you are a parent of a young child who's starting kindergarten through third grade this fall, please go to our website to learn more. It's ExcaliburClassicalAcademy.org, and I would love to tell you more about the curriculum and give you a tour of the school. It's going to be beautiful, and I'm just so excited about our 10 core values and all of the wonderful liberal arts education that we are going to be providing with our young students this fall. So I am super excited about my next guest because I'm actually applying to open a homeschool enrichment. It's called Shield Homeschool Enrichment, and we are in the queue and here to talk all about all the wonderful school choice options we have in Colorado is my special guest, Miss Renee Miller. Hi, Renee.
Hi, Priscilla. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, it is such a joy to talk to you. But before we get into the conversation, I'm going to share a little bit of your bio with our listeners. Renee Miller is an experienced education leader and the executive director and CEO of Colorado Homeschool Enrichment, a statewide program supporting homeschool families through part-time academic and enrichment opportunities. With more than 2 decades of leadership experience in education, she previously served as a director at the Garden School and Liberty Classical Academy, where she focused on alternative and classical education models. She's also a 2021 alum of Leadership Program of the Rockies. Renee holds degrees in liberal studies and a Master of Arts in Teaching and Learning from Point Loma Nazarene University. Her work centers on expanding flexible learning options for families. Through her leadership, Colorado Homeschool Enrichment has grown into a network serving families across the state. But Renee, your number one job is wife, mom, and grandma. So welcome again.
Thank you. Thank you.
One of my favorite questions to ask grandparents is, what is your grandma name?
Oh, Nane.
Nane. Okay, that's the first one. So very good. I love it. So which grandchild gave you that name? Or did you give yourself that grandma name?
Well, my mom, who is also lives with me, and she's 87, has been called Nani for a long, long time. And her sister is Nani. So we have Nani Ramona and Nani Bonnie, and I was Nani Renee. So it just morphed into Nane.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes total sense. I love it. So for my listeners on radio, they cannot see this wonderful library behind you, but my listeners who follow me on YouTube and Rumble and the different podcasts can see. And the first thing I notice is your Harvard Classics right above you. Tell me more about that collection.
Well, that actually belonged to my grandparents, and they were both one-room schoolhouse teachers in Colorado, actually in Baca County, or Vilas, actually, and taught most of their life. And then my grandfather became a preacher, so education was really important to them, and books were important. And so that set has a special place in my heart because it belonged to them.
Well, that's a really wonderful legacy that you have. And for the listeners who may not be as well-versed in classical education, the story is, if you read through all 50 plus one of the Harvard classics, it is the equivalent of getting a Harvard education. And it should take probably about 4 years to read through all of them, unless you're a voracious reader. But that's quite impressive. And I'm looking at it with a little bit of jealousy, but knowing that the set that I just ordered on eBay is on its way. It's supposed to be delivered. So I have to share, I've been looking for a set, and I was looking for like the 1909, because that's supposed to be, the original. And there are several of these collections out there. A lot of them are not complete, or they're a little bit damaged. And so you're having to sift through regularly to find a set that's in decent condition, 1909, kind of a collector's. And I found one, and I thought, well, that's a lot of money. The eBay seller was asking almost $800 for this set. And I'm like, let me just put out an offer, because it said best offer. So I put out an offer that was about half, and he accepted it. So it's on its way. I know.
What a great find. What a great find.
I'm so excited.
I would say it's worth it.
Yes. That's going to be my personal set, although I will have it at work, because I want to try to read through them and take my time. But I'm so excited to have this conversation with you, because you are so experienced in the classical world, in the homeschool world. Talk a little bit about Homeschool Enrichment. It's kind of new with the state funding, but can you talk a little bit about your organization?
Yes. So I have spent most of my professional life in the classical world. I started a classical school in '97 that was hybrid. And I also worked with street schools on at-risk retrieval. So the bulk of my career has been working with people that don't really fit that target of public education, the sort of 9 to 5, 5 days a week. And so for whatever reason, it's a wide variety of reasons. And I'm from a rural area, so it's hard to get services and things out here. The districts are small, don't often have a vision for some of the things that we're doing. And so over the last several years, I'd watched what had happened with the enrichment programs, and there's many in Denver, there's many in Colorado Springs, some in some of the other areas, but it's a difficult thing to access. And so when I ran into the BOCES on the Front Range, they were willing to open a door for us to access it in a different way, kind of a decentralized way. And so we have what you would call like decentralized one-room classrooms. Like, we're really trying to support groups of homeschoolers to do what they're already doing. We're in about the fourth wave of homeschooling. So sometimes with homeschooling, people think about like the 80s or 90s or what their experience was then. But our families that we're working with are very savvy, and they know a lot about choice and what they want to see happen for their child's education. So it's a whole different world of homeschoolers now. And I think it's hard for some people in the traditional establishments to kind of understand what the current homeschooler looks like. So we're really able to tap into helping them do what they do well.
So a few weeks ago, there was a wonderful celebration at the Capitol. It was the Homeschool Day, and it's so beautiful to see all the beautiful pictures and the singing and the Capitol and all of the wonderful families coming and being part civically to support this school choice movement with homeschool enrichment. For those who may not know, and I always love to try to encourage parents who maybe are thinking about homeschooling but feel a little bit intimidated that they might not have all of the support. Homeschool Enrichment provides wonderful options. Can you talk a little bit about some of the enrichment offerings in the state of Colorado?
I'm not really sure about all the different offerings, but what we do is connect homeschool families in with a campus, a group of students, and they work with someone that we've trained and we're supporting to pick from a catalog of, kind of state-aligned classes that they want their children to have access to with a group and somebody overseeing that. So we have a lot of accountability and tracking, and our families like being a part of a larger group. And to have that kind of guidance, because as you know, government involvement and government money is very different than the private world. It's very complex and complicated and there's a lot of different players. And so we're hoping at Colorado Homeschool Enrichment to help navigate that side of it for our families so they can do what they do best, be with their children, be with their community, and give their kids sort of access to things they haven't necessarily, in rural areas, we don't always have a lot of access to things. And it's complicated to connect with both a group. And then there's the funding challenge because they've already paid their taxes for public school. And then they're paying for their whole homeschooling. And so for them to access some of that benefit as a member of our community has been really exciting and fun. We're enjoying it.
Yes. So I got a sneak peek of some of the different offerings, and they're wonderful. So parents can go online or go to your website and look and see what the list offering is in their area and try to connect, like you said, with other homeschool families with wonderful enrichment opportunities. At Shield Homeschool Enrichment, we are offering mathematics and physical education that's really targeted, not just general PE, but actual physical education and health training. And so we're excited about what we're going to be offering for our homeschool community this fall. But classical, talk about your journey to becoming a teacher. What compelled you to become an educator?
Well, I'm from a long line of educators. Both my grandparents actually were one-room schoolhouse teachers in Colorado. And I have a very large family, and many of them are teachers. And I just, from a very young age, loved teaching, loved education. So that's always been the area I'm interested in. But when I was doing my master's and I began traveling a lot, I worked for Department of Defense in Germany. I worked in Southern California. I was really looking for models of education that I wanted my children and I wanted to be a part of. And so they're hard to access again out here in Newcastle. Newcastle's about 5,000 people. We're in a rural area. But I came upon classical education. One of our friends from college got involved with Logos and out in Idaho and started sending us information. And when I saw that, it really made sense to me. To me, classical education is just common sense. This is how my grandparents learned. This is, the kind of education I want. I was traveling around Europe, seeing art museums, all of this rich history, and I didn't get any of that in my education. I really had a pretty poor education. For example, I had no grammar ever through my master's. Like they just weren't doing it. They just had decided. I had no classic books until college. They just weren't teaching that in the public school. So when I discovered classical education and had a richer education in college, I wanted that for my children and I wanted it for my community. And so that's how I got into starting a school. There wasn't one here.
So what did you teach? What grade levels and subjects?
Well, I've actually taught all grade levels because I have done some kindergarten, first and second. My background is in math and sciences, but really I've ended up doing a lot of administrating. So because there was no one else to do it, and I wanted it to happen for my kids. And so I did a lot of the front work around teaching people. They didn't know what hybrid was. They didn't know what classical was in our area. They don't know why you would want to pay for an education or wear a uniform. We have predominantly only public schools here. And so it was a heavy lift. And I spent a lot of time meeting one-on-one with people and walking them through it. And I'm happy to say the school's there 30 years later and we have 170 kids and still doing well. So
that's amazing. When I think of the education I received many decades ago,
me too,
was almost representative of a traditional classical education. And in these 32 years that I've been a public educator, I've seen it change quite a bit. So it doesn't even resemble what a classic education is. Now, in the classical world, we have very common words that we use: wisdom, virtue, truth, beauty, all of these things. And depending on who you ask in the classical world, they have their version of how they would explain what a classical education is. If someone was new who came to you and said, Renee, what is a classical education? How would you explain it in your own words?
Well, I always start with that there is a great conversation going on throughout history. and has been going on for thousands of years. And our goal as parents and educators is to introduce our kids to the great conversation. And to be part of that great conversation, which is all the big existential questions. Who are we? Why are we here? Why is there suffering? All the things that make being human such an interesting and rich thing. So we want our kids to engage with that. And for them to do that, and they want to engage with it, we need to set some foundation for that. So number one, they need to understand the flow of history. So, when I started, I didn't know if the Renaissance or Middle Ages, I had no idea. I had no history pre-1500, also clear through my master's, and I was a very good student. And so we have to start with there's a flow of history, and people have been writing and thinking about this for a long time. And so understanding the flow of history and then understanding original sources. The people have been writing and talking about this. So I don't want the students to take my word for what George Washington thinks or what Dante wrote. I want them to be able to read it and understand it. And to do that, they have to have really good language skills. And so we want to introduce them to the concept of original sources so that they can enter the conversation as their own person with their own ideas, not just what I told them to think about it. But to do that, they have to have good facility in language. And so that's where Latin comes in. And when I first heard Latin, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not very good at languages. But after doing this for almost 30 years, it is a must. That's why grammar is so important, because I ended up living in Europe and I couldn't make heads or tails of how to learn German because I had no grammar. And so it really slowed me down, even when I've been in other countries, in learning languages. So Latin is a must, good reading skills. So it's the flow of history, it's the great conversation, it's good language skills, and seems like there's something else. Oh, original sources. And the last thing is that truth, beauty, and goodness, right? Has to be infused in every part of what we're doing. And so, yeah, that's my little quick version of classical. Oh, and I guess I didn't go through the grammar, logic, and rhetoric stages, but, I think understanding the flow, original sources, all of that is a good introduction for people to go, hey, I want to know more about that.
In addition to the grandparent question, I love asking people how they explain the classical education model, because I get such beautiful explanations and I'm like, I'm going to use that. That is so beautiful. So who do you think a classical education is ideal for?
Well, I feel very strongly that every child deserves a classical education. And I mean every child. And I live in a small area, so I don't have access to different schools. So my gifted kids go there, my challenged kids go here. We have to meet all of them. So I can tell you for 30 years, I've worked with kids at every level of it. And they don't all end up proficient in Latin and going to a classical college, although several of them have. I certainly have kids who are very, very scholarly. Some of them have gone into the trade. So I've really worked with all of them. But those principles you talk about, truth, beauty, goodness, engaging in the great conversation, there is no economic level or intellectual level. And I guess from a Christian viewpoint, we look at the Bible. Everyone can benefit from engaging with that. We're people of the word. And so I think that applies. And that's really my passion. Not everyone feels that way, but that's been my experience. And I think everyone needs that sort of soul, nourishing, life-giving, right? Education.
Yeah. I've been asked by a couple of parents, well, my children are gifted. How do you teach gifted children? And it gives me an opportunity to explain this model is very different from what you would expect for a child, quote unquote, gifted, or a child that's on an IEP. So how would you help navigate this conversation for a parent who believes their child is gifted and they're looking at a classical school model?
Well, the beauty of understanding the flow of history and education is that we're not looking at, okay, 6-year-olds do this, 7-year-olds do this, 8-year-olds do this. It's infused with goodness and beauty and stories. And your gifted kids are going to love that, and they're going to run with it. They're going to go home and read 10 more books like that. But your kids that are struggling a little, they can hear the story. And when we're working on character development, I haven't really known any child to be gifted in character development. It doesn't match with the IQ.
Right, because
And
that
so,
frontal lobe is still being developed. There's still that fog there.
and so, I also worked always in hybrid schools, and we're starting a hybrid school, classical school in Colorado Springs as well, which is outside of Che and Colorado Homeschool Enrichment, but a private hybrid school. But the beauty of hybrid, I've found, is that they can be in class 2 days a week, but then they also have that time at home where they can work individually. And really, it helps accommodate those different levels really well. But classical education by its nature is a lifelong endeavor that they'll never come to the end of. So
Right. It's
gifted
more than just
fly.
it's more than just I'm gonna give you a puzzle and see how fast you can solve it, right? That's
Yes.
how we think of gifted to be able to extrapolate manipulatives or things like that. But it's like you said, it's about character development, morality, raising servant leaders, these types of things. And the things that children learn in a classical education are transferable. And I
Yeah.
know the goal is that they will use the skills and the virtues that they've learned to be amazing citizens that are creative and can contribute to the world around them. And I think giftedness is embedded in this model that
Yeah.
every child is
Right. It's
gifted.
very unique. And God has a call on all of us for different purposes. So one thing we did was had a 40-hour project that they would do in high school around the time period. And so every child would spend 40 hours developing something and then present it to the class. And it could be a hands-on thing. We've had kids make beautiful tables and stained glass or whatever the time period is. But then those, gifted kids have done all kinds of amazing things as well, and then are able to present it. So I'm also big into experiential education, which sets me to one side of the classical group. Not all classical schools look like ours. Ours is very experiential. And that, of course, really hits the different levels nicely.
So you mentioned the faith element, which in my classical school will have a flag ceremony every morning where we say the pledge, but it's always God and country first. So before the pledge, we will say a prayer. And we will sometimes sing a patriotic song, or we may sometimes sing a hymn. We may sometimes recite a quote from a great author or mentor, or we may sometimes quote from a scripture in the Bible. And these things are embedded. When I think of our declaration, and as we are getting ready to celebrate our nation's 250th birthday, when we talk about our inalienable rights that come from the Creator, where our founding fathers were very smart. They knew that our rights did not come from the government, and they knew who the Creator was. So when someone asks you about God and Christianity in classical education, how do you explain embedding God into a classical education?
Well, I think what you just said is absolutely true. If you're going to teach the Declaration of Independence, I mean, they had read all of the Greek writings, Lex Rex, all, they were pulling from all of that. They were pulling from the Judeo-Christian tradition. So it's very hard to understand the writings of Thomas Jefferson or George Washington if you don't bring anything to the table. We say you're not adequatio, right? You're not adequate to understand the conversation. They spoke several languages. And so in a classical education, by the time we get to the last 250 years, the kids will have already studied the previous, 3,000 or 4,000 years. And so it puts our thinking and our history in context. And so I just think that's a beautiful thing. And if you're also looking historically, the Greeks had their religion, the Romans had their religion. We certainly have the Bible as an original source. And so I found the intellectual freedom in private education to be so great because we could talk about anything. My difficulty in public education, and I'm now back in the public arena, so Che is a secular organization. We're working in a secular arena, but so that's different for me. But in classical education, everything can be talked about. Nothing is off base. and you can talk about why and who, and that's so much richer for students. When I was teaching at-risk students, a lot of them dropped out. They were boys and they dropped out because they were bored out of their minds. And what they wanted to talk about was what was important to them in life. And you can't do that outside of the context. And that didn't mean they needed to believe like me, but they wanted to talk about it. So I find it to be much more intellectually honest and rich and open classical education. And I think you can approach Christianity or religion through that lens really effectively.
Yes, that's beautiful. The freedom for parents to be the first educators of their children in specific doctrine, I think, is really key to support. And as you mentioned, the Colorado Homeschool Enrichment program is state tax dollars. So there are some restrictions, but there are some freedoms as well that kind of hand in glove in finding a homeschool enrichment. So there's something for everybody. I know there's quite a bit of variety and some beautiful options that I'm a little bit jealous of that I wish I could access. And so I would encourage parents to look into homeschool enrichment opportunities for their children. Can you share your website and where people can find you?
Yes, we're CHE.school. So it's Colorado Homeschool Enrichment. We call it CHE, CHE for short, CHE.school. And we would love to have people call. I have an amazing staff. We have amazing campus directors, and they would love to visit with people.
Yes, I've been talking with Ken Witt and Ted Mishi, and they've been really helpful in talking me through the application process. So also, if there is a homeschool group that would like to apply to be a homeschool enrichment program, they can go to your website if they have a great idea. But we also know we need parents to pay attention to what's happening down at the Capitol because we rely on our state legislators to fund it. It sounds like we're okay for this coming year, but that doesn't necessarily mean, well, the legislative session is still open. Okay. Anything can happen. Yeah.
Well, and I think the important thing there is we really want to look in Colorado about what education of the future looks like. We don't want to be stuck in the 1970s or 80s, 9 to 5, 5 days a week in a brick and mortar. That's just not what the education of the future looks like. And so I'm really hoping as a state we'll embrace choice, we'll embrace opportunities that really, as public funds, should be for, I think, all children. And that we should really be supporting all of this choice because I know families really thrive.
Well, Renee, I am so sorry we're out of time, but I've thoroughly enjoyed getting to talk with you. We will continue this offline and many, many more conversations. But to my listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. Catch me next time. And remember, educating the mind without the heart is no education. So seek wisdom, cultivate virtue, and speak truth.
Thanks for tuning in to Restoring Education in America with Priscilla Rahn. Visit PriscillaRahn.com to connect or learn how you can sponsor future episodes to keep this message of faith, freedom, and education on the air.